Welcome to today's webinar, a Funding Deep Dive Part 1. So this is the first of a two-part event and the start of our brand new Learning Lab series designed just for you, solution providers tackling food waste every day. These sessions are all about giving you practical tools, insights, and real-world examples to help you grow your impact. Because at ReFED, this is what drives us. We're a nonprofit working to catalyze the food system toward evidence-based action to stop wasting food. And we know that the real change happens when the food waste solutions being built on the ground can grow and create meaningful impact. And that's where our innovation team comes in. So I'm Angel Vessa, I'm the Director of Innovation here at ReFED, and I'm joined by Michelle Chang, our Innovation Program Manager and the newest member at ReFED. Together, we lead initiatives that directly support solution providers and bring partners together to help accelerate food waste innovation. Now, before we dive into the conversation today, we just have a couple of quick announcements. First up, we're hosting a webinar in 2 weeks from classroom to cafeteria action to reduce school food waste. So school's back in session. It's a good time to talk about the 530,000 tons of food that goes uneaten in cafeterias every year, costing nearly $2 billion. So in this webinar, you're going to hear from World Wildlife Fund's food waste warriors who are implementing successful food waste reduction programs and gain insights into how to launch or strengthen a food waste initiative program at your local school. So be sure to register. You can find the registration link in the chat. Also, ReFED's going to be in Georgia next month. We're hosting an event, Cocktails and Conversations in Atlanta on Tuesday, September 9th, and we'd love for you and a guest to be there. We're going to be at Monday Night Garage, so if you're in the area, we'd love for you to join us. And if you have any contacts in the Atlanta area who'd be excited to attend as well, please feel free to share this event with them. I'm sending the RSVP details in the chat now, and we hope you'll come join us. Now, without further ado, let's dive into today's webinar. So when we asked solution providers what topics you wanted most from our new Learning Lab series, fundraising was at the very top of the list. So today, we're giving you exactly that, direct access to the people who hold the keys to funding solutions like yours. So we're going to hear from funders who review hundreds of solutions every year. They know what works, what doesn't, and what it really takes for a solution to secure funding. So this is insight straight from the people who decide what gets funded and why. So joining me today are Arthur Chow from S2G Investments, Ida Posner, a trustee at Posner Foundation, and the founder of Hawthorne Food Ventures, and one of ReFED's fantastic board members. And we also have with us today Jasmin Kern, Senior Associate at Lever VC. Thank you all so much for being with us today. So for the audience, could you just tell us a bit about yourself? We'd love to hear a bit about your respective funds, what led you to work in the food and ag space, and what you're most excited about right now when it comes to food waste innovation. And I'd love for you to kick us off.
There we go. Hi, everyone. I promise it's not my first Zoom call. I'm Ida Posner. As Angel said, I have a couple of roles here. So the first is as founder and managing partner of Hawthorne Food Ventures, which is a venture capital fund for food waste. At our core, we invest in startups who are helping us solve food loss and waste, really looking at early stage solutions. I'm also trustee of the Posner Foundation of Pittsburgh. And so we have a grant making portfolio through the foundation that is focused on reshaping consumer environments and reducing and focusing on food waste prevention. So we really look upstream at getting at that over half of food waste that's occurring at the consumer level. So when I look at investing in food waste, I'm doing it both from the market rate venture capital side through Hawthorne Food Ventures and direct grant making to 501c3 nonprofits through the Posner Foundation of Pittsburgh. And as Angel said, also a very proud member of ReFED. And I split my time between Chicago, where I am today, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Thanks, Ida. Arthur, I would love for you to go up next.
Sure. Great to meet everyone. Arthur Chow. I'm a principal on S2G and the Food and Ag team. We are a multi-stage investment firm, so more broadly focused on climate sustainability and addressing environmental issues. So it spans across clean energy, oceans and seafood, and my team, the food and ag, which is really focused on the entire food value chain. So from agriculture inputs to what's happening at the farm to supply chain technologies and all the way towards the consumer end, where I have a background both in CPG and investment banking and private equity before then. So we really focus on overall right now, really more on the growth stage side. So companies that we define as 10 million and up in revenue, but also have a large venture portfolio that we've invested in historically as well.
Great, thanks, Arthur. Jasmin, take us home.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jasmin. I work with Lever VC. I'm a senior associate there. And Lever VC, we're an early stage VC fund. So we typically invest in companies anywhere from seed through to Series B. We're also, like S2G, very broad in the food and ag space, but always focused with improving our food systems, in particular sustainability and health. Yeah, I've gotten to the food space initially more from the technical side, so did some work in food tech R&D prior to joining Lever VC. And yeah, I'm excited to be here today and talk to everyone.
Yeah, we're glad you all are here. You're the right people we want to hear from. So maybe just to take a step back, set the stage, could you help us better understand kind of what's been happening in the food and ag funding landscape? You know, how has it been shifting in the last 2 to 3 years? Are there specific trends emerging? Any types of funders or capital sources becoming more active or influential right now?
Yeah, I can give a high level overview. So I'm sure everyone here has noticed that funding for food and ag has decreased over the past 2 years. So it's definitely something we're noticing. And with that, what that means is that a lot of funds and funders are really focused on more focused on profitability, pathways to profitability and commercialization. So product market fit, I think, is a much bigger sticking point for funds than simply innovation and defensibility. So yeah, we're seeing higher expectations for companies at similar stages and valuations coming down. I would say another kind of topical area that we're seeing a lot more focus on is data and the use of data for traceability, supply chain optimization, and how we can use all of this data that's being generated these days to optimize our food systems. Yeah, that's just high level from my perspective.
No, that's really helpful. Arthur, yeah, it looked like you maybe had something to add on to that.
Yeah, maybe just to build on that, I think there's a lot of conversation among investors and capital allocators right now around the exit landscape. And honestly, in food and agriculture, there haven't been that many exits. I think there's been a couple bright spots in CPG more recently, and hopefully that's a trend that continues. But that's on most investors' minds right now, is they have investors too, our limited partners, and our limited partners are asking where's the return of money and capital. DPI or excuse me, distributions paid in capital is a big conversation, and that is really just about when we exit, we actually return capital to our investors. And with the lack of that, it's been hard for funds to raise additional capital or the next funds to continue to support those companies. So I think that's as much as because of that, there's been a more, as Jasmin mentioned, a focus on profitability, on margin stability, unit economics, and it's no longer growth at all costs that there was in 2021 or 2020 and kind of big TAMs. And I think those are important for investors, but it's as much about building sustainable business model from the business sense and from the financial sense as it is having the impact.
Yeah, maybe just quickly on that note, just because obviously ReFED runs its own grant fund and we have funders that we need to report to. And when we're talking to them, our funders are all philanthropic, but they're also very interested on the business case, even for the nonprofits that we're supporting, and understanding whether or not they're growing their impact and what regions they're going into. So it is just also thinking about that financial standpoint and their profitability, not just the impact, like Arthur was saying, for the nonprofits as well, at least from what we are hearing from the funders that we're working with on the grant fund. And I'm curious if you'd add anything to that as well.
Yeah, I think on the investment side, especially in the ag world, there's also just increased consolidation. So both in terms of it's the same for exits, right? I mean, there's a few big industry players, and so it's both really necessary for smaller players to drive that innovation because it's harder for big companies to innovate, and it's a little bit more challenging to really get those solutions to scale. And I think we'll talk about this later, but when you're working with growing cycles and physical infrastructure and an environment that is not going to iterate at the same pace as a software solution, it just looks a little bit different, you know, your pace of growth and all of that. So there's just some differences, even when we say venture capital, what we mean when we're talking about how we're going to scale these solutions. And then from the philanthropic side, I mean, there's also just the context right now that there are a lot of competing, urgent, really valid issues to be working on. And so for grant seeking organizations, this has been a really challenging year. And I know that many foundations are reallocating budgets, are rethinking both on the investment side and the grant making side. What do we do with the broader kind of macroeconomic trends, with the things that are going on globally right now? And that does have an impact on existing grantees, on new strategies. I think a bright spot is that there's been an increased visibility into supply chain and food in the past 5 years, especially coming out of COVID. We all have those memories of, you know, food insecurity and the fragility of our food systems really being front and center. And so I think there is greater awareness that there are challenges and opportunities, and it's figuring out how do we connect the dots and really get this to drive that capital, those resources to those solutions, which again is why, you know, the things like the ReFED is doing is so important to try and connect those solution providers and capital providers.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm switching gears a bit here, but kind of with that in mind, are there funding sources that you think are underutilized by solution providers, especially those working out of typical VC pathways?
I think one thing that we've seen pick up a lot in the recent years, in part due to constraints on supply chains, and climate change's effect on crop performance, is that a lot of large multinational companies are more interested in starting projects with startups. And so we've seen that both from, a very large portion of our investors are large multinational food and ag corporations. And we hear that from them all the time. And while they might not, their venture capital arms might not be as active, they are still always actively looking for solutions, particularly for problems that are likely to worsen over time, particularly with increased global warming and those types of effects.
Arthur, I saw you on mute. Did you have a comment on that?
Oh, no, I was just realizing that I didn't realize how to get unmuted, but I guess I would say there is a lot of different sources. I think that, you know, that kind of gets back to alignment between your investor, who you might be taking in capital from, and there are a number of other sources between family offices, foundations, grant making, non-dilutive capital alternative around debt, potentially, that we could get more into that. But that, I think, thinking through all those options, in some cases, venture should be kind of on the latter end of where you should be searching. I think, given the expectations around, you know, growth and return of capital and exit time frame, that may or may not align with how you're trying to build a business.
I guess actually, Arthur, while we have you, are you seeing kind of that increased collaboration between different types of funders, so philanthropy and VC? I believe, right, S2G Ventures is a unique one.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly, part of S2G, we were a part of a family office, or historically, it's how we got started. So Lucas Walton, one of the Walton family members, really, when he started his own family office, he has a philanthropy side, an asset management side, and then we were part of his direct investing team and thinking about the for-profit side, but how do we still create that impact? And what we see is, you know, it's not often that you get these folks coming together in a single room, but more and more, I think people have realized, especially with policy and what's changing on the government side, they all need to be really working in concert, especially if we're trying to have the impact around changing, you know, energy systems or food systems. it doesn't just require millions or billions, but requires trillions of capital in that sense to solve these hard to abate challenges. So you really need to, I think we've seen a lot more focused collaboration around that, both from the government side, but also as philanthropy is just not sitting in isolation anymore, or the venture side is not sitting in isolation anymore. I think there's more and more, especially around climate change, connectivity coming there together.
That's great to hear. I'm curious, with that in mind, with that increased collaboration, what might that mean for some of the food waste solution providers on the call? Do they need to like structure their funding strategy differently?
I think they certainly, just to be more aware of those options, and how these are getting more interconnected. And so learning that if you make one connection with a certain party, they may be part of a network, and really to continue to dive in there. That people, I think, inherently in the way that people want to do better and have this impact, I think there's a lot of kind of right intentions. But you don't always pick up the phone. And so just trying to realize like where connections can be made. I think being more proactive and thinking about the conferences and how you bring those people together, there's a lot more just untapped potential there.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess kind of on this, thinking about strategy, I'm curious for the group, how do you recommend solution providers think about the right funding for their current stage? And kind of when should they be aware that maybe there's a mismatch? Kind of how would you direct them to think about that? Maybe Ida, I'd love for you to kick us off.
Yeah, and I think, first of all, I agree with everything Arthur said. And I think there is, in the venture world right now, this question around, is venture well suited for ag tech? And I prefer the question, what does venture look like in ag tech? Because I think it can apply, you just have to have the right context. And so, I mean, anytime you're going to be taking money from anyone else in any form, you have to be really sure you need it and want it, and it's going to do what you need it to do, right? Because you're adding complexity, you're adding stakeholders around the table, you're adding, in the case of venture, ownership of your company. And so the first is really making sure, you have the right fit of an investor for the stage of your organization, be that a nonprofit or a company. And I think one of the things in the venture world is making sure that you have the right timing expectations. Because again, these are long sales cycles, growing cycles. Adoption takes longer than it would in a lot of the kind of high tech worlds. And so if you have a fund you're taking money from and they're trying to return their capital in a timeline that doesn't make sense for you, it's not going to end well for anyone. And you really need to have more patient investors. That I think family offices have a big role to play here. And people always ask me, like, great, family offices, could you send me a list? And the reality is it's very relationship based, and that investment process takes longer, and it's going to look very different. And so it is, there are more interesting ways to fund companies, but they're not necessarily as straightforward as going and Googling kind of, what are the top 10 funds that I should be talking to, lining up calls, and you're done. So I think where I always start with when you're looking at finding the right funding is who is sitting at the table with you, because when you go through a diligence process, you're on opposite sides of the table until hopefully you get an investment, and then you're in it together. And so that is when the real work starts. And so you want to make sure that you are partnering with someone who really shares your vision, someone that you feel like you can go to when things don't go well. Everyone loves a good news story. You want to have people with you who understand that that's, the plan for today is the plan for today. That's probably going to change tomorrow. And so it's much more about, who you're with. And then there are some structural things as well, again, with, the stage of your company, your, like how quickly you do want to grow. Again, right now, everyone's really focused on getting to profitability and having more of that stability. So there's both some, quantitative and qualitative factors that you want to consider.
Yeah, I like that reminder about timing and finding the right partner. Arthur or Jasmin, anything you would add to that?
I think Ida said it very well on the timing piece in particular. I think that's a really important one for the ag tech and to some extent food tech space. And yeah, I would just reiterate leaning on your existing investors or existing partners to make some of those connections. And I do think there are opportunities where if you're working, for example, on a B2B solution, are there corporate partners that you can lean on that might do an upfront paid pilot or something like that that can help fund some of the work that you need to do to get to a more commercially ready state where then VC funding makes more sense.
Maybe Ida, for the nonprofits in the room, I'm curious if you have, specific advice or guidance for them, knowing that they're also trying to find funding right now. Any words of insight for them?
Yeah, I think my advice here, a couple points. One is that you always want to be really true with your mission of what you're trying to do and not kind of do a kitchen sink approach to a grant proposal of, we're going to do everything and therefore we check every box and we can, reach out to every funder. With food waste specifically, when I first started working on this issue a decade ago, no one was really focused on it. And now there's more acknowledgement that food waste is an active area that we should be looking at, we should be funding. That being said, I've kind of given up on trying to convince everyone in the world that this is the number one issue that they should be focused on. I hope that's the case. I'd love for everyone to wake up every day and think about food waste, but acknowledging that they're not going to, I try and think about where's the overlap with what they're passionate about or what they're excited about with food waste. Because as we know, this is not just a climate issue. It's not just a food issue. It touches the economy. It touches public health, education, all these things. And so there's all those ways that you can think about where does my work intersect with what this funder or this organization is already doing. And that's a much more authentic way to start the conversation. Not saying it's going to end up with an investment or a grant, but you have that sense of here's where we do connect. Let's see if there's something else there. And then a couple of things that I just have seen happen that haven't necessarily ended in the best way is number one, there was this moment where it was really exciting for funders to think about organizations that had earned revenue streams. And that's fantastic if that works for your model of your organization. But if you're just trying to get a revenue stream because it looks good to funders to say we're not only reliant on philanthropic dollars, again, that's not sustainable. And maybe that lasts for a couple of years, but it's probably not going to work long term. If your model is based on pure grant funding, that's okay. Just help the funder understand why that is and what your impact story is, because that's really what you're investing in from a foundation is we're still investing money, just the return is in impact, not in dollars. And then the final thing is related to tech, because there's a lot of nonprofits doing great work in the tech space right now. And I think Mimi from Replate's on the call. So I'll give them a shout out for doing some really interesting things with tech and food rescue. But making sure that the development and building that whole tech stack doesn't take over your focus and funding of the nonprofit, because tech is expensive and complicated. And once you build it, you have to maintain it, you have to update it. And it can be easy to kind of underestimate how much work and effort that takes and whether that should be part of your core operations or something that's spun off. And I think one thing that Replate's done really well is thinking about where can we have that great earned revenue stream. So doing fee for service food rescues, which is also generating a value for that service, which I fundamentally believe is there. But then also having part of their organization that is funded by grant making that, that earned revenue is not going to cover the entire overhead right now. So you do need that supplementary support. But having that kind of strategic plan of where do all these pieces fit together and how are we going to fund this organization sustainably for the long term, not just thinking about kind of what's the most attractive thing to get funding today.
I love that. I'm hearing a lot about staying core to your mission and having a focus and really tailoring that to the different funders or stakeholders that you're looking to work with. So appreciate you kind of covering that. On that note, actually, want to dig into those alternative financing strategies. You mentioned earned revenues. I'm curious for the group, kind of when should a solution provider consider these other financing strategies, whether it is earned revenue, PRIs, or government grants? Maybe Jasmin, I'll kick it to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to first think about what is it that you need the cash for, and are there other ways to finance it? For example, something that we see often with our companies is oftentimes it's capital expenditure that's needed. And are there better ways to finance it? Are there partners you can use to finance it? Are there other assets you can use that are already sitting idle? Or is it that you have a working capital issue and you just don't have a good cash flow at the moment? And are there better ways to finance that than with venture? So I think it's really about figuring out what the problem is and what you need the cash for. and then seeing what fits best in terms of aligning with your goals.
Great advice. I think, Jasmin, right, when we were talking before, I think you had good insight into, especially for profits, when they should be looking for, as an example, government grants. I'm curious if you wanted to expand on that a little for the group.
Yeah, so something we've seen with some of our portfolio companies that are working on platform solutions is that oftentimes these platforms can be applicable to a lot of different government grants and government initiatives. But oftentimes what we've found is that by spending a lot of time on these grants, firstly, grant writing can take a lot of time. And so that may not be the best time spent if you're a 3-person team and you really need to start working on the commercial strategy. So that's one piece of it. And then the other is sometimes these grants end up having very specific goals in mind or specific projects that might not necessarily be in line with your core focus. And so it kind of splits what you're working on, your time spent, and we see that kind of leading companies astray for a certain amount of time, and that can be detrimental to future fundraising initiatives, especially if you're then looking to raise from venture and trying to tell a cohesive story. So I think it's just thinking very strategically about whether that grant is really in line with what you're trying to build at the moment, or if maybe it's something that's better to hold off on for now and then apply for the next round when you have kind of the foundation of what you're building set up.
Must be hard to say no to a funding opportunity, but great advice to try and make sure you're staying aligned. Arthur or Ida, anything else you'd kind of add to these alternative financing strategies?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've sort of said it in different ways, but the venture funding is actually the most expensive form of capital, and just from the rate of return. So I think if you sort of start at those others, where can I get cheaper cost of capital from? And that often comes in the form of grant making or debt, or at least it's less dilutive to your equity overall. But I think a lot of folks have different expectations after that in underwriting. So I think on the debt side, they're much more thinking about the downside of, is there collateral? Are there assets to potentially recover after that? And so, and there's kind of expectations on performance. So if you're kind of in that stage and you're getting to that commercial and it seems to be more stable, perhaps that's a better time to go after that more debt funding. Whereas I think on the venture side, it goes back to the expectations of not only from a time period of when you expect to exit, but also that rate of growth. And I know we just said investors are more focused on profitability right now, so I'm going to kind of talk out both sides of my mouth, but we still do care about growth, and growth is still important. And usually we define growth, at least something that starts to be attractive in more of the 20+% type of year-on-year growth. And depending on some industries, it's 50% or 100%. So if you think that your growth plan says, I can, I may not get double my business next year, but I have a steady rate of growth, venture might not be the right funding for that as well. So I think thinking through just of your own business plan, as Jasmin was saying, and like that, your path to growth there and what you need from that use of proceeds, and does this help me launch to, get to 10x revenue where I was, then venture might be more suited for that. But if it's not, I think that's where you have to go back towards expectations between who you're getting funding from.
Mm-hmm. Great. I want to kind of move us along because I know I can feel the solution providers want to just kind of get to this question, which is for this group, when you're evaluating a funding opportunity, what are those key elements beyond the solution itself that help you say yes to a potential funding opportunity? And maybe Ida, I'll kick it off to you first.
Yeah, I think, the kind of cop-out answer here is that you're always investing in people, and so you want to look at the team, right? You're with early stage companies and with nonprofits, you're tackling big issues and things are going to change. And so again, it really comes down to, do you have that strong belief in the founder and the founding team to be able to pull the right people in to be able to pivot and really, I don't even want to say go with the flow, because it's not going with the flow. It's like figuring out the chaos, right? So it's largely about people, but at the end of the day, it has to be something that you're really solving a problem, not a solution looking for a problem. It has to be a solution that everyone really needs. And I said this earlier, when I look at food waste, my favorite solutions are solutions that at the surface may not even look like a food waste solution, but are. And so I was looking at a shelf life extension company the other day, and they can save you a significant amount on transportation costs. So even if you don't care about the shelf life extension of that product, you're saving on transportation. Every company is going to care about that. It's a huge expense. And so where you have a value proposition that covers more than one area, like that's really a standout for me. And then I think you also have to think about competition in this space. And I'll give the answer from the nonprofit space as well, because I know there's a lot of people on this call. So our foundation, we only fund really prevention-focused solutions. And I think in a wonderful way, we've seen a huge amount of food recovery organizations come to life in the past 5 years, 6 years, and that's incredible. And so a lot of that is very place-based work. And so part of it is thinking about, again, what is the differentiator here? Who are the partners that you're working with? Because every nonprofit's going to work with other organizations. And so where does that scale really happen from giving a grant to this one organization that can scale? And that could be scaling in a city. It doesn't have to be scaling internationally, but how does this grant have that multiplier effect that you're not just going to kind of have a one-to-one return, like you want that amplification. So in both cases, we're thinking about scale. We're thinking about, is this a real problem that we're actually going to be able to solve, and it's not just kind of putting a Band-Aid on the solution.
Thanks for sharing that, Ida. I think we have a very similar view when we run our catalytic grant fund. We obviously will give money to nonprofits, and we have funded several food recovery organizations, but we are looking at like kind of where is that bigger impact or opportunity. And to your point, doesn't always have to mean you're scaling internationally, but just looking for those key levers to unlock greater impact. Arthur or Jasmin, anything else you would add?
Yeah, happy to go. I mean, I think I probably said this ad nauseum now a few times. You heard me say it, like unit economics over and over again. But I do think that ability to that's sort of the proof and point there where this can scale. If you're making one widget, one unit of something, and like you're making good margin on that, then you can start to think about over time that how does that help build the team and support behind. I would agree with Ida that like number one at the earlier stages is for sure team, and the team that has the background to solve that challenge, or hopefully the know-how to, and to some degree the grit as well. And that hustle that I sort of see with our entrepreneurs, are they just responding quickly to email? Are they sort of on top of scheduling? Are they following up and doing kind of things that they say they're doing? So there's just those little signs there that can be really helpful, but taking each of those investor conversations seriously. And then the second area I think is just around that product market fit and that customer side too. It's for us, it's the biggest part of our diligence is hopefully when we get to the point of being able to talk to customers and just hearing what they say, dude, is this the proverbial, is it a painkiller or is it a vitamin? And does somebody really need this? And do they find that, in a way of, it's not just a relationship sale, but they're measuring ROI in some respect of the solution that they're trying on? Is really helpful? The last area, I'd kind of give the example with Flash Food is one of our portfolio companies and working in the food waste space. It's an app that works with grocery stores to sell discounted food that's near an expiration. And honestly, there was a lot at first. The sale pitch was around food waste prevention and realistically, actually, we learned that the consumer, both the shopper and the retailer, doesn't actually care about that. They care about the savings that you get from a grocery bill, and they care about the economic impact on a store based on their shrink, and so they can prevent that food waste. And so I think almost more than anything else that we do on the impact side, there's such a tangible, measurable benefit to preventing food waste that's real in a real dollar sense. And so to be able to tell that story and bring that to life as you're making those pitches, I think is really powerful and important. And that goes to sustainability, not only for the planet, but we think about sustainability of your business itself, and can it continue to fund itself? And the biggest impact that we can see is usually those who have that for-profit side are thinking about that, so they can help scale their business in a bigger way.
Yeah, I would very much reiterate the product market fit. I think it's the biggest kind of problem we see with a lot of pitch decks or companies that we speak to, is that it's almost like the solution is trying to find a problem into which it fits. And really what you need is a large enough market that's willing to pay, and not just willing to pay, but feels like they can make money off of the solution, as Arthur said. And then in addition to that, is the market really big enough for that? So oftentimes we see pitch decks with, $10 billion TAM for tomatoes, but your solution is actually just a very small fraction of that entire value chain. And so being a little bit more realistic about how many customers are there really out there that want to or can pay for the solution and benefit from the solution. And then I think that can help you think about how to build a business around that. So, okay, maybe the solution only fits for about 10% of tomato growers, but maybe it's also very similar to strawberry growers or something like that. So thinking a little bit broader, but keeping the business model simple. And thinking about that go-to-market strategy and who is it that you're really targeting and tailoring the story to them. We typically think that when you're doing particularly a B2B story, well, actually also B2C, but it's better not to focus on sustainability and instead focus on the savings, the financials, the economics, and then the sustainability is kind of like the cherry on top. So very much reiterating what the other said.
But I want to double down on that, Jasmin, because I can imagine a lot of the solution providers in the call are like, what do you mean they don't care about food waste? But it is so important that many of your customers, whether you're a nonprofit trying to get a food donor or you're a for-profit trying to win some other business, it really does matter that you need to talk about the thing that is their pain point. And it might not be food waste, but your solution could be solving that pain point. You just have to tell that story. And we think about that a lot too when we're looking at opportunities for the grant fund. We do think about product market fit and a willingness to pay. And it could be time, it could be labor, but in the case of nonprofits who are doing food recovery, are food donors willing to give up that time and energy to get you that surplus food? And what are you doing that is making them want to do that or make it attractive or whatever it might be? And those are the things that we're going to look for. And even if you have maybe some initial traction in a certain area, we want to make sure it's repeatable traction, that you're going to be able to see that momentum moving forward. And so I think a lot of these apply actually to whether or not you're a for-profit or a nonprofit. So I know we've all been saying similar things, but I do think it's really important to get that message across to the group today. Well, let's switch gears. We talked a bit about the yes and the things you look for. What is the most common reason that you may have turned down a promising solution? And is there something they could have done differently? Maybe Arthur, will have you kick us off.
Yeah. Beyond what we touched upon, I do think though that the impact story itself. So as an impact fund, we talk a lot about measuring our impact, and we have a portfolio survey that we send out now. We ask our companies to think about the KPIs that they're tracking that align to both their business KPIs, but hopefully food waste tracking and that impact side. And I see that a lot of folks don't have that story really well defined between the impact that they're trying to make and the business alignment as well. And I think trying to marry those two is really important, and how you think about the scale at the end. Because I think if there is an area, a pocket on funding that is more of a bright spot, or there's capital inflows to right now, it is more on that climate side and showing that you're able to have an environmental impact on what you're doing. And so there's still funding there. It's definitely it's less than I'd say in the heydays of 2020 and 21, but I still think there's a lot of interest in there. And so having that story tighter, having an understanding of the impact that you're actually having within your business and measuring that from day one, I think is really important, and to really be thinking about that.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add, team again, and that's a hard one to say because, sometimes if you're turning something down, it can be about the team. And I think the positive way to frame that is that's why you have co-founders, or that's why you have other people around the table. You don't have to be perfect at everything. None of us are. You do need to have humility, and you do need to know how to work well with others and to bring other people on board. And so, I've seen a lot of great ideas that, there were gaps in the team, and there can be gaps too. That's fine. But you need to have the mindset of, I'm going to bring other people in to help me and to grow this organization, this company. And so if you don't have that humility and that curiosity, which comes back to what we were talking about earlier with like really being driven and passionate about the work, it's going to be hard to sell the vision to an investor.
Yeah, and honestly, along the same line, I think naturally founders are often visionaries and have these huge ideas and these dreams that they want to build something really big. And what often ends up happening is that to an investor who sees, I don't know, 5 different pitches every day, you tend to lean towards the ones that seem more realistic because it's important to feel like the founder understands the market very well that they're going into. What actually, again, is the problem that's being solved? What is your solution? What is the best way to target your customer, and how do you know this? So always thinking about kind of what we say is like citing your sources, like where do you get these numbers from? What makes you say that this is the best approach, or that they really need this? Like, where are you getting your information from? And kind of treading that line between this can be really big and I see a huge future for the solution, but also I'm realistic about how to get there and what I need to do to be able to achieve these goals.
That's great. I want to get to our audience's questions here in a second, but I have one more question for the group before we switch gears. And I'm curious, what would you say to a founder, an organization that gets frustrated with fundraising and just sees it as a necessary evil? Kind of any advice for them?
Yeah, I feel like I've heard this a lot, and I have a couple of thoughts on it. First of all, is I think to me, pitching is as much about talking as it is listening. Because while it is, first of all, investors know it's exhausting. Like it's a lot. And it's, fundraising is difficult and it's slow and it never happens on the timeline you want unless you get lucky. And like that's wonderful, but that's the exception, not the rule, right? Like we know. Um, but it's also a really awesome opportunity. You're in these conversations with people who have this really broad perspective or seeing all of these different trends in the broader economy in that sector. Like use that as a learning opportunity and really listen. I always give people the advice of anytime you start a conversation or a pitch, you should really know who you're talking to and you should be able to tailor your message to them. It's just going to help the whole meeting go much better. And then use that as the opportunity to ask questions and, get some feedback, right? Because especially if you're in a live conversation, like take advantage of that. It can really help you, crystallize your thinking or, deal with a sticky question. And again, you're looking at starting a relationship with someone. That is what, when someone is on your cap table, when someone's on your board, that's a relationship. And you're going to have to invest even more time into that relationship moving forward. So you want to make sure it works both ways. And then in the event that you do have someone who is, on board, that's also just a chance, like you're going to be speaking to them at least quarterly. And so use that as an opportunity too, right? Like think about who you would want to have closer communication with as a person, as a firm, and really view that as an opportunity. But yeah, I'll come back to like, first of all, like we know it's a long process for everyone. And that I think is going to show where you're really passionate about this work. And like, you have to keep, staying motivated. And that's why you need a great team around you who can support the work of the company while you are doing a really important job of a CEO or founder is to fundraise for the company. So it's part of the job. And I think you can reframe it as a really fun learning opportunity.
Yeah, I completely agree with Ida. And maybe just more tangible things like ask at the end whether this fund thinks this is a fit. It's better to get to a no fast than to wait around thinking it might be a yes. You can focus your energy elsewhere. So ask, is there anything you feel is missing from this? Or what are your initial thoughts after hearing this pitch? Or ask them, do you already know the space very well at the beginning? And so then you can skip over some of the market sizing and why is this an issue? Why is a solution needed? And focus really on what makes you different. So just knowing, again, like who your audience is, make sure the funding that they provide actually matches to the type of funding you're looking for. That's something that happens occasionally where it's, too early or too late stage. So yeah, getting to know the person you're talking to and taking that time. And if you get on a call with a VC or another type of funding entity, I mean, it's great to take that time to really learn and then be able to tailor it better for the next time because you'll likely have a lot of the same calls. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like the idea that it's a two-way street. I've been on the other side and helping to fundraise, and part of the reason why I think I'm back on this side is I heard a lot of no's, and I wasn't used to that. And that's part of what I think being on that side is it's there's that capital allocation game. We see thousands of deals a year. And so we're not doing that many deals in any one given time. And it's really about kind of finding the one that you have to jive with as a partner for sure. And to know, so I think asking those questions about what they look for and doing homework as much as you can ahead of time, but even on the call, investors should be, for the most part, willing to be able to say, where are they at from their fund life cycle, and do they think about reserve capital and supporting the company, beyond this round. And those are important questions to ask and figure about that partner at the end of the day. And doing that, I think that really helps turn that is into the conversation. I've had a lot of monologues that someone will pitch me for 20, 30 minutes nonstop before sort of letting me kind of ask the first question. And or they'll kind of go directly into, here's how the food system works. And, we have that understanding. That's why we're talking. Some folks, like, if you're talking to a generalist investor, you don't need that. Of course, you need to have a little bit of that education process. So I think Jasmin was saying, like, get to know your investor, you do the research as much as you can, at least ahead of time, to know, is this a family office? Is this a investor only does Series A or B? And something with S2G, I know a lot of folks, we have a large venture portfolio, and we have done a lot of that historically, but we have shifted more into the growth equity side more recently. So I think looking at the funding announcements, the blog posts that people have, there's a lot out there. I found LinkedIn is especially like a pretty good source of information with new funds and what they're thinking about and where they're headed. But there's a lot you can actually do and find out about those conversations ahead of time, and if it's even worth having now, or if it's worth having down the road. Because I think it's that's the last piece maybe that advice I give, is to build that relationship over time. I love, like, being able to meet somebody for the first time and just hear about their business, as opposed to, oh, and can you write a check next week? Like, it's a longer process than that to get to know somebody, to really get to understand their business. And especially when you get to meet somebody early at a conference and say, hey, I'm going to do this in a year, and come check back in with me. And if you want to be a part of this journey, here's where I think I'm going to be. And I see that, and I get much more excited when they hit that plan a year from now, and it's getting to our strike zone, and I get to know that person a lot better.
I love that. Really starting that relationship early on and just building it. Like, it's gonna take time to really deepen that. So I appreciate all of that. Awesome. Well, let's hear from the audience. Let's go ahead and welcome Michelle. Hey, Michelle. What are we hearing from the audience? What questions do they have?
So the first one is for the group, for the speakers. As funders, what do you think is key for potential grantees to stand out amongst their peers? Do you have an example or a story for how a nonprofit or for-profit stood out to you? And how do you make a solution sticky? So just open that to the speakers.
I can take a start at this. So we're an invitation-only foundation. I should have said that up front. We don't accept unsolicited proposals, but we did an open call on food waste probably 3 years ago now, 3 or 4. And our intent there was to actually cast a broader net into other nonprofits who, again, maybe not a food waste organization at their top line, but touch these different parts of the food system. And that enabled us to get a couple of really interesting projects into our portfolio. One was Impact Justice, and they actually have a food in prison project. And as you can imagine, the food served in our prison system is not great. So most of it goes in the trash. And they've done a couple of really interesting projects in the state of Maine and in California with trying to improve the food that incarcerated people are being served and are producing actually at some farms on site in the prison systems, which is really amazing, which again has nutritional and behavioral impacts, but also is reducing food waste in a prison system. And so that is one that I don't think we ever would have found if we were just looking at kind of your standard food waste projects, but has had a really incredible impact story, along with the fact that it is solving food waste at the end of the day. So we love stories, and we love organizations that have that really compelling narrative of we are solving food waste and we're touching all of these other areas in different areas of impact.
Great. Arthur, Jasmin, any other thoughts on that question in particular? No.
Nothing specific. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can stand out, whether that's team and having a background in the space that you're looking towards, having deployed a similar model in the past, or maybe it's having a really strong commercial partnership where that partner is really invested in the solution you're providing, or maybe it's just honestly cost reduction. Are you able to do something that everyone else is doing, but for 10x the price that you're able to do it for? That I would say catches our eye quite often.
Great. Alrighty. So moving on to the next question. The author of this question said, our team lost federal funding for a household food waste prevention study and are looking for funding to finish developing and host the intervention website. Do you have any resources or know of any grant opportunities, recommendations for where to look for academic funding?
I wish I had a better answer to this. I don't. I think I'll just like empathize with you. It's a really hard time right now. And the reality is private philanthropic dollars can't fill the gap that federal funding has created. And so I think where there are opportunities to think about catalytic capital, again, where is it not just a one-for-one replacement of the funds that were lost, but if there's a specific part of that project that you can carve out and say, hey, we lost 100% of our funding. If we got 10% of that back, we could do 50% of the work. You know, wherever you can get that outsized return on a grant has a more compelling narrative than saying, we lost X number of dollars, we got to backfill it, because the reality is private philanthropy just can't do it. And I know that's, you know, it's hard and it's not a great time for that. But yeah, think about how to be catalytic and how to maybe carve out a portion of what you were doing that you could rework and create its own kind of project.
Great. Alrighty. Next question that we have is for a solution provider, whether for-profit or non-profit, and they're trying to get on a funder's radar early on, what strategies or approaches have you seen work best from your experience?
Happy to take this one. So I do think warm introductions certainly help, and I'd probably rank, if there's a warm intro like from our own portfolio or the founders that we work with and entrepreneurs that we work with, those are sometimes just the best, knowing that, you know, they kind of know what it takes to get there, and that grit and that determination. So if it's a recommendation intro coming from those type of founder circles, I'm probably very likely to take that call. I think then kind of going down from there, the co-investment network that we have, and the other both investors, but strategic partners, executives in our network. You're trying to play, you know, the 6 degrees of separation game, and do the homework on LinkedIn and really try to find those different connections, and have it, you know, in many ways coming from different places as well. So if you can have multiple touch points, it does kind of get back to the reality of that we do see a lot of deals and get a lot of emails on a daily basis. And so those that there's a familiar connection somewhere is the best place to start. In absent of all that, if you kind of can't find that warm intro, I do think it really starts to come back towards then, you know, your little pitch deck, your little teaser, the email that you have, to be really succinct and to be pointed in terms of the highlights, that the progress that you're making, and really what you're looking for in terms of funding, to make that less of the treasure hunt, or us to figure out, you know, is this email kind of worth the time to read through, and to grab people's attention that way with, so as I say, like that we have a 10x cost reduction in something, or something sort of, whether it's like one eye popping stat or something else, to sort of sift through that noise. But the best I could say is try to find that warm intro, even if it's sort of second, third degree separation.
And just to build on that, oh, go ahead, Jasmin.
No, I was just gonna say, in addition to warm intros, if you can't get a warm intro, if you can get some sort of press announcement, something that could be in Food Navigator or Veg Economist or something similar. I know a lot of funds do track those, so it's a way to get your name out there, and for it to be easily accessible. So that's a place where we often source deals, or we see something interesting as an alternative.
That's a great call out, actually. I appreciate you saying that. And the thing I was going to say was building off of Arthur about being concise with your pitch, especially if you can't get that warm intro. And something that I heard another funder talk about was how they've seen founders think about it almost like when you pitch a movie. And so like the story they used was when I guess Jaws was being pitched. They said it was like, or sorry, Aliens was being pitched. It's like Jaws in space. Like, you know, Jaws, and you can imagine space, and it's like really sticky for people. And so the moment you can come up with something like that for yours, I think can be really helpful too, to help a funder remember what you're doing. I think we have time for one last question, Michelle.
Alrighty. So for this one, it's here we go. The author has said, we have a L3C model that allows us to align with small-scale food business farms and producers that solve food waste through using the online platform by managing inventory and market distribution in more efficient ways. But this model is a bit unknown and confusing to funders. So they love to know if there are examples of innovative social mission business collaboratives and structures that could be attractive to funders looking for impact and financial sustainability.
I can take a stab at this. And I guess my top line thing will be, it is important to be able to simplify what you're doing and to talk about it in a way that is able, to translate out of the world in which we all live in our own silos, right? And you have to be able to talk about the business model and the business in a broader context. And part of that, I think you can do by talking to more people who have no idea what you do. Go talk to someone who knows nothing about ag, who knows nothing about food, and try and explain your business model, and listen to the parts that they're not connecting with, right? And that's, again, where it comes back to this whole fundraising process is also a listening exercise and a learning exercise. Off the top of my head, I'm struggling to come up with a specific business model that I would reference, but I do think, and I mean, I remember, in my MBA experience, there's all kinds of case studies you can look up on specific social enterprise models. To what Angel just said, it is sometimes helpful to have that example that people are able to reference that is more front of mind. So I think part of that is a little bit of a research exercise in maybe finding some of the successful models that are similar to what you're doing and using that as a framework to help start the conversation with a funder or someone who isn't as familiar with that business model, because sometimes it's just like it's a language issue, or it's a translation issue.
Well, I think unfortunately, we weren't able to get to every single question, but we will be sending a recap email to try to cover any questions that weren't covered today. But thank you so much, Michelle, for walking us through that. I do have kind of a wrap-up question for our speakers today. If there is one piece of advice you would leave with the solution providers on our call, kind of what do you want them to walk away with today? Just one key piece of advice. It's a big question. Any brave souls?
I'll go first. I would say, yeah, stay curious and view this as an opportunity to keep learning and growing. And you're doing really important work, and let your passion shine through. But always be listening and learning and growing.
I would say cite your sources. Think realistically, but think like larger vision. But how do you really get there? Like, think about those intermediate steps as well. And the TAM piece, that's one that really gets me sometimes. So think about how you're calculating your TAM before you put it in your pitch deck.
I do love a good bottoms up TAM analysis too, I will say, versus the top down of like, here, it's a $10 billion. We take like this little slice of it. This means we get this. And think about building that up. So fully agree with that. I think my piece would be around think about that full complete story, and that there's a lot of funders out there who think about the for-profit and the impact side, and there is a way to marry those two. They don't have to be one and the same. And I think part of our thesis in really trying to prove out, you can have some of the biggest impact by being for-profit. But again, food waste is maybe most clear line of sight to me in terms of economic value there, that you can prevent, that you can save or prevent from waste is really powerful. And so don't lose sight of that, especially in terms of the audiences that you're talking to.
Well, thank you all so much for your words of wisdom. Really appreciate it. Everyone, please join me, whether you want to send reactions, whatever it might be, send appreciation over chat. But thank you so much, Arthur, Ida, and Jasmin, for everything you've shared with us today. We really appreciate it. I know we're at time and we asked our speakers lots of questions, but audience, if you're still with us, we have a couple of questions for you. There should be a poll popping up. If you could just take one brief moment to share your feedback, we would really appreciate it. And of course, you're welcome to email us directly if you want to share more context around your ratings here. Looks like we're getting quite a few coming through. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Really appreciate this input. Just to wrap us up, remember, this is just part one. We still have more coming for you in part two, taking place next Wednesday, August 27th at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. Don't miss out. And with that, thank you again to our speakers and a huge shout out to all of you for taking the time out of your Monday to join us.